All right, welcome everyone. Oh, there we go. My name is Shelly Lehman. I am the TIG coordinator for the Northern area. I work in CSA 8, 9, and 12. With me today, I am thankful. I have a couple TIG folks on help supporting. Jenny Jacobs is going to be help manning the chat. We'll drop some links in the chat for you as we get going. She'll be dropping in a copy of the presentation, and then as we go, she'll put in some access to the actual document we're going to be talking about. And we have Pam Jensen on as well. Thank you. So just to kind of give a little overview of the intent and purpose of the Beyond Age 18 transition programming document, over the last year or two, TIG and DPI have received several questions about 18 to 21-year-old programming. Many of the questions could be summarized, such as just how do you design an 18 to 21-year-old transition programming? Or do you have a good replicate of a program of how it should look like? So as a result, TIG ended up creating a new guidance to answer some of these questions. So just to note, the focus of this guidance, however, is to support teams to create individualized transition programming by a robust network of transition stakeholders, rather than creating a recipe of a transition program that can be replicated around the state. So it's more to help guide the programming as you go. Today, I'm going to share the guidance with all of you. Really excited to do so. It's been a work in progress over the last year, so I'm excited to share it with you, get your feedback, and just see how you can take it back and use it in districts. So within the guidance, we define beyond age 18 as the time period where students with IEPs stay in school beyond their peers in their 4-year cohort. So for some students with IEPs, this time may be used to finish credits towards graduation with a regular high school diploma, while others may be building skills as they enter transition to life after high school, or for some it could be both. This guidance is provided to help teams reflect on what supports are needed and where, as well as connecting with outside agencies and braiding services to increase post-school outcomes for our students with IEPs. So just to kind of give you an overview of what is in the guide, and we will get to the guide in just a little bit and take a big old dive in. But this is just an overview of what we have in the guide, in which we have the guide where you could print it off into a PDF or access it in a couple different ways and what would work for you and your teams. We also have put it into a Google site. But within the guide, we do start out with some policy of the current state and federal special education guidance and regulations, because it's crucial to be aware of that and know that going into as you're building programming. We have IEP team conversation starters to kind of help start to set the stage, and some teams may need that as they start to change their IEP as they're starting to plan for transition after 18. We also have a review and reflection section of important pieces of the IEP and PTP goals. And we also dive into some partnership resource mapping guidance. We provide you with some examples, some resources so that your team could build your own. The other crucial thing that we thought was helpful that we added in is we have 4 sample student schedules that are 4 students that are very different from each other, that are all have very different goals, and their schedules and their day and week look very different from each other as they are building skills to get to that goal. And within those schedules, we show how we braid services with outside agencies. So we're showing different resources that are coming in at different points of their day. We also are provided some templates for teams to lay out goals and plans, kind of to help to do that scheduling piece. They're all there for you to take and use. You certainly don't need to, but if that's helpful, they're there. And then we have some additional resources as well. I just wanted to start out a little bit by just talking a little bit about understanding the state and federal regulations. So IDEA and Wisconsin state statute provide the right for a student with an IEP to a FAPE until either the student earns a regular high school diploma or the student reaches maximum age. So a school district's accountability for beyond age 18 is to offer FAPE and prepare the student to reach post-secondary goals. A reminder that FAPE includes appropriate, meaning the student is making progress towards graduation requirements, IEP goals, and they're working on transition goals. So for some students, their IEP may make modifications to graduation requirements, but the responsibility to access and progress exists regardless of the disability-related needs of a student. Some keys to implementing FAPE for students beyond the age of 18. We have a couple different things we wanted to point out here, is that programming really needs to be individualized. Thus, our focus is really on the PTP as the foundation for this time in a student's educational career. So we kind of look at the PTP as the foundation of building all of this. It's also important IEP teams consider least restrictive environment, as this probably will change as they go past their 4-year cohort. It's important to think about where are students beyond age 18 learning, working, living, socializing, what are their peers doing at this age? Collaboration is a critical piece to operationalizing individualized programming and FAPE. And then ultimately, to keep in mind, the goal should be a meaningful day that continually helps students work towards the post-secondary goals in education, training, employment, and independent living. So another piece that we added in is we took basically, because there is a section on the state regulations, state and federal regulations, but we broke it down into a table. So to just kind of give another visual and way to dissect the state and federal regulations, and just a different type of visual, we put it in a should be, shouldn't be format. So this may be helpful to some teams. Again, the whole document, which we'll dive into here a little bit, I think it's really important that you do sit and carve out some time to read through the whole document. But then as you, after you've done that, certain teams may only need pieces of the document. And this is a piece that just kind of summarizes some of that information. It's important to keep in mind there isn't a clear-cut program or one way to do any of this. The whole process is done with a team and individualized, with the foundation being the student's IEP and PTP. Students start to get away from that traditional school day. So it's going to start to really look different for each student because everyone has a different goal. Of course, you may have some overlap or some students doing some similar things, but really for the most part, their schedules are going to look very different from each other. Community is sometimes an important piece missed. I think it's really important during this process or during this time after 18, that time is spent help transitioning students to have a place in the community so that they have a sense of belonging where they live. And so the chart kind of flows on here to 2 pages. So this is the rest of it. And just some important things to think about is it's important to think about what are the same age peers doing after leaving school, and then mirror to prepare for a similar life. What steps need to be taken to get to that? Again, it's all very individualized to bring meaning and relevance to the student. It's also imperative to take into consideration the student and family's cultural background and what's important to their family and in their lives. It takes some work and creativity to make each student's individual plan come alive, but I can tell you it can be done. It's messy, it's a messy process, but it comes together and you can do it. So while you may have some students doing some similar skill building, again, for the most part, each will have a very different looking day. You'll also need to make sure to recheck credits and look over transcripts just to make sure students have met graduation requirements. And a student may need to work on a credit or goal related to a class. All of this should be taken into consideration when building the student's day. So another piece that we added in that was, so I worked with some focus groups, kind of some districts across the state. And one piece that kept coming up was, I think sometimes the conversations in an IEP team maybe get stuck, or you need to start to shift their thinking. And so we did drop in some team conversation starters. There's 5 kind of main headings, and then under each of these within the document, there's some more questions or just kind of statements to reflect upon that might help the team to start to guide and generate and thinking about beyond 18. Keep in mind, starting conversations earlier rather than later helps ensure a more robust and successful transition plan. Teams may evolve as planning starts, and it may include student, family, school, community, outside agencies, or really anyone that's supporting a student upon graduation. Using community resource mapping is also valuable as conversations begin. And so we have some guidance on that. In the document, we do have more talking points to consider, but these are kind of the main things. A talking point that I also often used when I was teaching and doing the beyond 18 stuff in a district is I'd often just say to the team, what is our end goal? Where do we see where does the student see themselves in 5 years or down the road? And then with those goals, and they should be your PTP and also aligned to your IEP and PTP, build steps backwards. What do we need to do to get them there? So sometimes just breaking it down from there can help. Thinking about what goals we have in mind, what steps or experiences we need to do now to get there, what supports and outside agency resources can help a student transition into life after high school, what might their day look like, and consider recreation and leisure, employment, post-secondary education. Where are they going to belong to in the community? Where do they go to shop, to hang out with friends? What will their independent living look like? And other pieces that are important to consider is sometimes just having a conversation is how many hours a week can a student engage in an activity, or how many hours do they see themselves working? And then try to mirror their day to that as you go. The other pieces to kind of conversations to have are, how will it look like to ensure a gradual release from the direct full day support from a school team of adults to a team supporting in the community? And then often there's going to be other resources that come into play. There may be some voices that are missing from the table that you'll reach out to and get involved in the process. And really think about, listen to the student and the family. What is meaningful to the students? What are their likes, their fears? What are their hopes and dreams? What activities are they doing now or they'd like to do in the community? And then really start to look at what are some natural options for exploring transportation. Thinking about that the student won't be taking the school bus to work, but what are some other things that they could pull upon in the community for supports when they're done? And that could be individual. I had students that did rideshare. I had one student whose sister did some transportation. Other students had a bike. I had a student working on a driver's license. And then there's all the different community transportation support. So those are all conversations to have to start thinking about how to set up some programming in their day and schedule moving forward. Do we have any questions so far, Jenny, in the chat or anything? You can just pause here for anything that's coming up.
No, well, there was a question regarding supporting documents, but I think you're going to address that further into your presentation. So other than that, you're good to go.
Okay. So the next section that we have, and we're going to look in the document after this, we have a lot of sections within the document where there's really important pieces that you may not always go through step by step with your team, or maybe you do. And some teams may need that. And either way, there's resources there to wherever the team is starting at in the process. It's helpful to reflect on each of these sections, and we feel they're important pieces that the IEP teams take into consideration as they're building a day. It's not something that you have to go through and answer and write out each question, but to be aware of what's in their IEP and PTP. So we do have a section in there where we put the pieces that are absolutely crucial in the IEP and PTP that we want you to look at. It's more of a reminder of how important that their day is tied to that. Because it's not a program, it's an individualized process. So what we're going to do now is actually dive right in. Jenny can drop a link in the chat. She'll put a link. So the document is residing right now in our, on a website, on a Google site. So when you go to the Google site, you can print the document off in a PDF, if that's your learning style, to print it all off and read it, or it's divided into sections so that you can access that what you need to. All of this is on our TIG website, which I'll show you the access to that later on too. It's all under the transition planning tab on our website. So I'm just going to take you right over to the site. Can you all see that? All right, so this is the home page on the site. On the left-hand side are the pieces of it. So the introduction just kind of talks a little bit about what the Beyond 18 is. And it's important to know that on the bottom, we do have the download PDF version. This takes everything in this far left corner and then prints it out. So that's the entire document. So if you want to print that, I just do suggest whichever way you access the information, do take some time and read through all of it. And that will help you as you're building programming moving forward. So these are some of the pieces that I already talked about, the getting started, what you'll find in the guide. And then here's where we have the state and federal regulation requirements. So I strongly urge you to go and read through that. And if you have any questions, certainly reach out to me or a TIG coordinator. We're happy to help. And then underneath the state and federal requirements tab, that's where we have the do's and don'ts. This is where we have I'm sorry, it should be really the should be, should not be, right? So this is where we have it kind of broken down and just dissected in a different visual way. And then here are your conversation starters.
Shelley. Would you
Yes,
want to go back to the previous screen of the do's and don'ts or shoulds and shouldn'ts?
sure.
One of our participants, Julie, had a great question. She said,
Sure.
looking back at this chart of should and shouldn'ts, I'm assuming that if a student is applying for a program such as Project Search or other funded programs, it should have the skills that the student needs versus a program title, especially if the student does not get accepted into the program. So what are your thoughts on that?
That Project Search should have not, are you talking about their application process?
Right, because if a student, if they're in need of the services of Project Search, it's really, that's the type of programming they need versus the title of the program, I think is the point that Julie is trying to make with her comment. Julie, feel free to unmute if you've got a chance.
Sure.
That we don't even have a Project Search around us, but we do have another program that another school district runs. So any of
Uh-huh.
our students that want to go into it have an application process, and we have had multiple kids removed from the program. So that's where I'm like, ooh, because then we have to have a contingency plan in place if a student
Right.
one doesn't make it. And we've been working with the district too, because they used to have it, the application process over the summer. And there we sat, we're like, oh my gosh, if they don't get in, what do we do? So I'm assuming that's what you're saying, because I was just like, oh, it shouldn't be.
Oh, with the
wherever it comes from
application
before.
process?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Project Search is different because that is a nationally run program. They do have an application process. And you of course would send students to that if their goals fit with their framework of Project Search. In this purpose, we have the application process is that some schools may, let's say, for example, have an application that they have their students fill out to stay for that beyond 18 time. And we're saying it really should not be an application process. It's open to any student with an IEP. It shouldn't be disability specific. Any student with an IEP needing to continue to work on skills and services is able to stay. So really it's more of an IEP team decision as to if they're going to be staying on and still have things to work on. So that being said, Project Search is one of those things that's how they have it set up. And they do kind of look at a specific disability and skill level for their programming. I don't know if that makes sense or helpful, but
Yeah, I'm thinking more too, we have one in our area, not a Project Search, but a beyond 18 program in conjunction with the tech college, but our district doesn't run it. So if our students go, it's an application process. So that's where we get a little stuck sometimes, because like I said, we've had kids removed and then we sit like figuring out what are we going to do now, because it fit the skill set the kids needed, but something happened where they no longer could attend. So
sure.
you guys haven't been around that happens.
Right. And it's the importance of this is I often tell people that the team actually meets more. It's not a one time a year IEP meeting. And I guess my advice to give on that is that when I was teaching, I felt that as my students got older and closer to graduation and they're going through this beyond 18 process, it's almost important to meet and touch base more frequently. Lots of communication. It doesn't have to be called a formal IEP meeting every time. Maybe it's just kind of like a transition check-in once a month. I had a family that had a lot of supports and outside resources working with them, which is fantastic. But it's a lot of people to communicate with. And so in that type of situation, Julie, you may have to meet more often. So this individual, the family set up, we met, they had every other Friday or 2 Fridays open in the month from work because they both work. And we provided space for them at the high school to meet with whoever they needed to at that time. Because there's going to be lots of trial and error in all of this. So whether it be a program at the technical school or a job site, you have to regroup and come back and replan.
How did you navigate that not being an IEP meeting versus a meeting?
We just met.
Okay.
If it wasn't changing, so that was always a complicated thing because if you're not changing anything in the IEP, then we just would meet often. So a lot of outside resources that I at least ran into needed to check in with their student once a month or physically talk with the family and the student. So we kind of just created a space. And sometimes I would just hold that space for them and I wouldn't be involved. Maybe it was a private conversation with the outside agency and resource. Maybe I was involved. We had to change some scheduling. If it was something that had to change in their IEP or PTP, if it was something that was really changing a goal, because their goals, for the most part, were kind of set what we were working towards. If nothing changed in that, then we didn't need to hold an IEP. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. Any other questions or thoughts on that before I go on?
Nope, I think you can keep moving. Thanks.
Okay. The team conversations started. So this is where I had just went over the things with you that were in bold, and then there below each one is just kind of some additional reflection questions. So for sure, good to read through, share with your team, families, agencies. This is good for everyone to kind of read through and reflect upon to get in that frame of mind. So our hope is just to kind of, if there's teams that get stuck in the process, that maybe some of these reflection questions will help work through and get conversations going. The next piece that I had touched upon before diving in here is the individualized student transition planning. And I thought it was just kind of easier for me to show. So as I had said before, there's specific areas in the PTP and IEP that are really important to pay close attention to as you build programming. And so we listed these areas here. And then under each area, so for example, the student and family engagement, some of the tabs are going to say things like the IEP team should do the following. Some may say the IEP team should consider, there may be more considerations, and some may be you have to do this. So look through each piece, and it's just more of a reminder and the importance of these are the pieces that we need to know moving forward. The student and family engagement, of course, is incredibly important because I feel that as my students got older, I was talking to my families and the students more often because it's so important that you're working together, and that just really improves results in all areas. Then we have a transition assessment outcome, and some things to consider, and just knowing that the federal law does require a transition assessment to be completed prior to writing a student's post-secondary goals. So here are just some things to consider. And I'm not going to read through because of time. We just have an hour and I want to allow some time for some question and answer, but I do encourage you to go back and read. We do have some time to come back together in a few months to hear your thoughts after you read through everything. Hobbies and interests, of course, are very, and this just helps build that meaningful day. And just really is what drives, your schedule for the recreation, leisure, volunteering, employment. Post-secondary goals. We do have a link in here to the independent living checklist. I always felt this was valuable to me as a teacher. There's sometimes little things that I would forget. I'd read over it or reflect on it, share it with the families too, just to make sure there's not something that we're forgetting. That's an important piece that we need to work on, a skill before they graduate. Now, a little piece that I wanted to make sure I pointed out was that disability related needs. I think sometimes this is a piece in an IEP that's overlooked. It's so important because the disability related needs really is what drives the IEP goals. So it's important to know what they are, and then, maybe looking upon them, maybe the disability related needs change a little bit as you go into the beyond age 18. But that's a piece I think that, everybody looks at the goals, but I think it's important to come back to what drove that goal was what are their disability related needs. So do make sure that the team comes back to that and is aware of what the needs are. And of course, the IEP goals. We kind of go through, I'm not going to read every little one to you if you can do that, but the transition services, the credit summary and coursework transcript, that's an important piece. There are a lot of times because often, their courses or their transcript may look a little bit different. Sometimes what I had often happen is I would pull their transcript and I always did a credit check of students. Counselors do a fantastic job in our district. They have a lot of people. And I think sometimes that will happen with our students with IEP. They may have something listed differently. So I used to have students that went to an area technical school and that was listed a little bit different on their transcript. And I think just because that threw things off. And so then it would be listed in kind of like an other place. It wasn't really counted for credit. So if you're making, let's say in the IEP, the credit counts towards an elective or graduation, you'll know how to look at that transcript and how it should read, and you might pick up if there's something missing from that. So that happened every once in a while, not often, but it is important to look at that and make sure that you're on track. Employment history is important. Any and all the places that they participated in work and unpaid work, where they volunteered, where they've expressed an interest, maybe any college career fair outcomes. Outside agency partners are the important piece that really come into play as you move beyond 18. Really start to think about who are they currently working with? What agencies might come into play as they leave school? So maybe there's going to be new people coming on board. Who are we missing? Who is out in the community that we haven't connected with that may support the family? And then this leads into the braiding of services. So that's an important piece because as you're building the programming, the student's going to gradually release from the school and then go to the supports that will be in place after graduation. So how can you braid some of those services in? Are there places that you can share things? I work closely with DVR. There were times that DVR may had set up a work site, or they found it provided a job coach and we helped with the transportation, or we shared transportation costs. It can look so different. I mean, really every student that I've had go through, none of their services or how we braid services looked alike. So that's a piece to take into consideration as you build this, is you're going to have more hands in the services. Accommodations and modifications, what was used out on the job site? What will they use for post-secondary? And another little piece too to remember is that OT, PT, and speech can really be helpful in this process. They're able to, there were times that I had a student out on a job, and if I was, they were struggling with something of an ask or a question, my speech person would go and visit them on the site and then also work with them. Same thing with OT and PT. Don't forget about those folks. They're super helpful. So we have some reflection questions on building a team, because remember, your team might shift a little bit. It's going to look a little bit different. You're going to have more people on it. You should have more people on it. It should not be only school folk. Friends and family or anyone. I had a student that just had a neighbor that ended up being a strong mentor that would come to the meeting. So it can look different. And then again, the other piece is the community readiness. We'll go into the partnership resource mapping, really looking at what's available in your community. And then below there, I also have the student schedules, and then there's resources at the end. So that is the website. And remember that on the home page, you can go and print off the whole PDF document. Is there any questions on the website before I move on from here?
No, are you ready for a question though? It's not specifically to the website.
Sure.
It says, with the gradual release of school scheduling, especially in the final year of school for a student who would be aging out, what do you do when outside services are not ready to take a student and the school has already met time in the student's day to support IEP goals?
That's hard. It's a lot of conversation, right? There's no easy answer to that, because every agency works a little bit differently from each other. But to just keep coming back as a team and a family, I think trying to have these conversations earlier and starting with the supports earlier is helpful. You could definitely share this guidance with them. And maybe you have to look at other supports, because sometimes it may be out of your control. I'm not sure. Each county has such a different services of what they offer and maybe how they run. But I for sure always go to your ADRC. That's always the one-stop shop. And maybe there's a different way to look at things or different supports that could come into place for that student.
Okay, we have one other question. That's a good one. Do we need written permission to invite outside agencies if it is not an IEP meeting, but rather a transition planning meeting?
We always had permission. The outside agencies all have their own permission form. And what we did at school is we would ask for a copy of that as well. And because they have their own, they're probably better at remembering to have those forms signed than I was as a teacher trying to keep track of everything, but they will have their own release of information with the family. And then we always ask for a copy of that to just make sure that that was in place. And of course, I would have conversations with the family too. If there was an agency coming in and they wanted to talk to one of my students alone, I talked to the family about, do you want me present? Do you not want me there? So those are all kind of individual conversations as well, but for sure, make sure that those forms are all in place before that happens. Okay. I think I'm losing my voice. Sorry. I guess I just really wanted to reiterate, this is really a messy process, and I can't give you here you go, here's the program, take it back to your school and run with it. It depends. And I know people don't always like that answer, but it's what's best for the student, and it's an individualized. Everybody comes to the process differently and how they work it out, or how the team works it out. I can share that how I did it as a teacher. I was a big piece of paper girl with my best pencil, and I would put I kind of did mind mapping in a way. I put the student in the middle and I'd put the pieces all around of what would be coming into play, the PTP goals, the IEP goals, what were their post-secondary plans, what agencies were they working with, what transportation were they using, did they have a driver's license, where did they live? Did they have access to the public transportation? So I kind of would fill everything in where they were working. I always wanted to make sure I had recreation and leisure piece so that they were volunteering or, I always put in some sort of leisure piece. We were lucky our YMCA would allow students to pick any class they wanted to if they were interested in the Y and try it for free for one time. So just putting all those pieces in a schedule. And then eventually when I had all my students written in, had their individual plans, I'd start to look for common ground where some going out at the same time in the same direction. Did anybody have anything similar? And you just keep working until you have a schedule. Alicia Reinhardt also did the same thing before working at DPI, and she shared with me as well. What's also helpful is that in her district, and I had this somewhat in my district as well, she was in charge of creating the master schedule for the whole department. So then she could kind of look to see where to pull people for where supports would be certain hours of the day, and then being able to help coordinate the big picture was just a little bit more effective than different people doing different pieces of it. Eventually, when I would get things worked out on paper, I'd put it into a Google sheet or a drive and make a chart and try to build out my schedule that way. So there are some blank templates within the document where you can fill in the table, going through each piece to consider if that's your style, but really whatever works for you. And we have a couple different options in the document of templates. There's a mind map you could print off and kind of use as a template of how to think about things if that's your style as well. So it's a messy process, but it comes together. But as you know, in special education, it takes a while to, you keep changing, going with the flow as you need to adjust. So a really important piece is this partnership resource mapping. And I guess a note that I want to make is that it's really important to be connected to your CCOTs. CCOTs often, especially this past year while we were in the pandemic, as they were unable to get into schools or do maybe some of their more traditional work of what they typically did, spent some time doing some resource mapping. So if you are not involved in your county CCOT, I strongly urge you to get involved and attend as you can, at least get on that email list. Many already have a resource put together for the county. And so that was always helpful for me as a teacher because our area CCOT had this beautiful detailed resource document. So I was, which they updated every year. So that was very helpful. So that's an area for you to reach out to and to look into. This is an important piece because the team's basically building a transition network. So as a team, you'll want to utilize one of the tools to start a resource mapping with the student. Each member of the team, including the student and the family members, everybody has a different connection and resource that they bring to the table. So as the team starts to build a map, you can discuss all the supports that may come into play as part of the student's plan, and the team may reach out to others during this whole process too, because we're all connected to different people. That's the beauty of it. So really discuss the importance of doing this, at least having this done as you start to do some planning. And then you can share some of the different templates and resources that we have for building this network.
Shelley,
so the resource, yeah.
As you're talking about community mapping, there was a question about difficulty locating resources and community agencies that provide support for 18+ students who are non-documented. Do you have suggestions, or does anyone else on this Zoom have thoughts on that? Because that's a really good point. I think I'm sorry, did someone have some? It was just me. I said, I think the community mapping is a great way to start figuring out if there are other resources in your community that work around.
I still always suggest going the ADRC. They're like the one-stop shop, right, of all the resources in the area. Often they will house a resource map or a resource booklet. So that's also a good resource to start, and they may be able to help you out too. But the resource mapping is really kind of that intention to help see what is available and what you can, because there's so many things. Every year I'm learning of something in our community that I wasn't aware of that's there. So it's important to do this step. So this might be really helpful for you. So doing the resource mapping, there's 3 different areas that what it will help with. Basically, you're identifying what's available for each student. Then you're also secondly identifying new or existing resources to connect with yet. So there's a lot of resources that you just don't connect with during that 4-year cohort that you might know. And then really to talk through at what stages of the transition process, what time will they be coming in and connecting and working. So typically as they're starting at beyond 18, there's maybe more school involvement and some outside agency, but at like in a multi-year plan, there's going to be more and more supports coming in place and less of the school support. I mean, ideally to smoothly transition the student with a gradual release is ideal, right? So that's the thought behind that. So just thinking about your team, we did put together some different just folks and agencies to consider in each area of being part of your team. And this is just more of kind of like help jog the memory or of who else that you can draw upon for support. So this may also be for that last question helpful. So we have just some listed within the school. These are people that are possible supports to the student, outside agencies, and then things that are out in the community. So this is listed within the document as well as there's also a blank document to this. So you could print it off or just make a copy of it and type it in Google that you can fill in for each student. Like, who do we have in the school? Who do we have outside agencies? So these are just a few to kind of to help you think about your team a little bit differently and who else that you could add in there. And certainly if you think of one that you think we're missing on here, we'd love to hear from you. So you could drop it in the chat or email me, whichever way you want. But these are just some places to start to think about. We have resources. So the tools here will really help facilitate partnership resource mapping for transition teams. The teams may only use one of them or a combination of them. I know some of the area CCOTs did some asset mapping last year with the TIG team, did some training with the CCOTs around that and used the asset mapping. That's the first one. So there's different things. The other big thing that's been fantastic, if you ever see a training held by Jennifer Bumble and is it Matthew Flanagan, they do an outstanding Google Map training that, gosh, I wish I would have had when I was teaching, is just to be able to actually use Google Maps and then put it, and some CCOT teams have started to do this. I know one area county that I'm sitting on has done this for their county, is they've created a map with the locations of each outside agency, and then that's a map you can share. So that here's a few of the main, there's so many resources, but here's a few of the main ones. One thing, and I'm just keeping an eye on time because I want to allow here, the student sample schedules, again, there's 4 of them and they're shaded differently, different depending on what agencies. We also, because color may not always work well visually for someone to interpret, we did put symbols on the map that show, I think it has like for transportation, it has a little car, and then for an outside agency, I think it has people shaking hands or something. So we have different symbols for each one that just kind of show how the services come together. They're examples. They're not things to take and replicate. And you wouldn't be able to anyway, right? Because it's an individualized plan, but it's just to kind of show you of how for various students their schedules may look like in this process and how the outside agencies are coming in to support. We do have, the additional templates. There's just 3 examples you may use. You may make your own. I would love to hear from you if you have something that you've made on your own or have something else. That's the best part of this business is sharing with each other, right? And just remember, this is not a canned process, and there's more than one way to get there. But these are some tools that if it helps your mindset or to kind of get started, these are some places that you can start. It will ask you to make a copy, but you can take it and run with it, use whatever you want. I want to pause and just kind of hear back from you. If there's, for one, any questions. Is there anything in the chat, Jenny?
No, I think you've addressed everything in there so far. So if people, you can either add to the chat or feel free to unmute at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Unmute if you're comfortable. A lot of this is just kind of showing you the site and the document. And then what we're ultimately wanting to do is we're planning a community conversation in November. I would love for all of you to take this and go back, read it through, use pieces, use whatever you want out of it. But I would really love for you, if you're able to attend that community conversation in November. It's November 2nd from 9 to 10:30. And that's a place where we'll go a little bit deeper and share about how are we using the document, how do things look in your district, and share ideas and work through some things. Okay. So we have the additional resources. I did create a Padlet that has resources that I'll keep changing as they come in. Of course, there's so many. I tended to take the key ones. So you can find that if you have the presentation up by clicking here, or you can find it's all listed in the site and in the document. We also have access to the opening doors. NTAC is the national transition group that we get a lot of fantastic information from. And then of course our TIG Wisconsin Transition Conference and our website. If you're not a member of our website or have a login, I urge you to go and do that, because that will share out updates, and you'll keep up to date on all the latest with transition that we share out. There's so many resources, but this is just a few of the bigger ones that we tend to draw upon. If there's a resource that you find really valuable and I don't have it on the Padlet or listed somewhere, I would love to hear from you. So please reach out. Again, where you can access all of this is, for now, here's the link to our website, and it takes you to all the information is listed on our homepage under the transition planning tab. There's the Padlet link, the documents also in there. The tag is just about done. They revamped it, and it will be coming out soon. It's going to be listed in there as well as on the DPI website. Going forward, and I'm hoping to hear more from you in the community conversation. It's possible maybe we would take this into a course or a class where we're talking through the pieces. But I'd love to hear from you as to what's the easiest way for you to access information. Is there something that would be more helpful to you? You can take yourself off mute or drop it in the chat or think on it. You can always reach out to us.
Shelley, there's a question that if you'd like to address. Is there a list of districts that have defined 18+ programs?
No, there is not. So, and really in starting the work on this, there's very, very different districts are doing things differently from each other. So there's not like a set programming. It should just really be individualized. I don't know if some of those things will change a little bit, but I'm also hoping that those voices that are doing the work, there's some fantastic ones. There's not an inclusive list. I do list on the Padlet. I have a column of some districts that are doing the Beyond 18 programming that aligns to this document. So I do have about 3 or 4, I think, listed on there that you could look at. So there's many districts doing it very well, but there's not an inclusive list of all of them. So moving forward, we're planning on introducing this again. It would be likely kind of the same type of presentation, but we're doing it on September 21st. Since that's in school or during school time, we'll be doing that at 3:30 to 4:30. So if you have a teacher you'd like to send or somebody else within your district to hear that, we will be doing this again. Again, the community conversation is, it's so important because often the teacher in your district or the transition coordinator is a siloed position, right? You just have that one person typically in a district. So it's important to be able to build some support and networking for that person. When I was teaching, I loved being able to network with other transition coordinators or people doing the Beyond 18 in their district, just to share ideas or to run maybe a scenario by them. Maybe they can help me work through something. So the intent of the community conversation is to come together after you've had some time to look at this document, kind of reflect on what you're doing in your district, and then come to the conversation. We'll talk through how are you using it, what are you doing in your district, and then from there, the community conversation will talk about some networking groups that we'd like to set up. Whether that just be an informal networking group that we meet once a month, or maybe we meet more frequently. I'm going to run by a few scenarios of some different platforms of how that could look. So I would love if you can make it. We have it set there, and the registration, you can go to our site to register for the community conversation by this link. And Jenny will drop that in the chat as well. And I'm sure this document will continue to grow and be added to as we go. So happy to hear any feedback from you. Are there any questions, comments, feedback now that you'd like to share? Nothing? We do have a quick survey that we'd really like to hear back from you. This helps us or appreciate your thoughts. We listen to you. Jenny will drop the survey link in the chat and the password Shelly13083 all together. And you do need to capitalize the S. If you have any further questions, you're welcome to stay on after too. I'm happy to talk through anything. It is 10 o'clock. I really appreciate all of you attending and listening through this. I'm excited to share this out. So please do take some time to read through it. You can reach out to me. My email is in the contact, as well as you can reach out to your area TIG coordinator too. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Probably stop recording, huh, Jenny?